Welcome everyone to the latest edition of the Inside Track podcast. We've got a awesome guest with us this morning, Stuart Broster. How are you?
Very well. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me on.
Absolute pleasure. And as always, my superstar guest or partner, Russ. How are you, Russ?
I'm good, a tad under the weather, but good. Really looking forward to this one today. And this is going to
No,
be
so
really
am I.
good.
And what a great start to the year. Obviously, this is season 10, first podcast, and we get Stuart on. So I think what a way to start the year. Um, Probably most people I would have thought, Stuart, know who you are. But for those that don't, do you want to give us a quick fire through in terms of who you are and what it is that you do?
Yeah, basically, I started in the hospitality industry 40 plus years ago.
Wow.
Predominantly, I started initially as a hotelier. When I say a hotelier, what I mean by that is that I worked extensively for a company called Stackers Hotels, who ironically then bought LivingWell, which at the time was probably 8 or 9 clubs. I then became managing director of LivingWell as a transition from a guy called Frank Reed, stroke Matthew Bucknell, ironically. And basically, we grew that business quite extensively, particularly in the UK. And then we did a reverse management transfer, or we did a reverse management buyout with Hilton, which is how I then became to work for Hilton. So all the management
Okay.
backers went to Hilton. And when Hilton bought us, subsequently, then that allowed us to then grow LivingWell as a business internationally, which meant that we could build clubs or were opening clubs in Brazil, Turkey,
Nice.
extensively in Australia. We almost had a division set up in Australia itself. Subsequently, then being part of Hilton, which is obviously the most recognized hotel brand in the world, unprompted, I said to my boss at the time, who was David Michel's, I wanted to go back into hotels naturally. Um, so I then went to Canada for 4 years and ran a number of hotels, probably 50, 60 hotels in Canada,
Wow.
two in America, one called the Chicago Drake, which is quite well known, and one called the Marquette in Minneapolis. And then grew that business quite extensively, more so not just on owned estate, but also under the franchise principle. So I was a master franchise or was a franchisor, so to speak. And then subsequently came back to the UK, became chief exec of LA Fitness, which again was a growth business. We bought Dragons Health Clubs. Um, and then subsequently then opened my own hotel management company.
Oh wow.
So we recognized the model in the UK was not yet transferred to what you would say franchise owner and then management company. So
Yeah,
we
yeah.
saw that as an opportunity. So we built that business up to about 18, 19 hotels. We were managing different brands as a management company. So obviously that was it was a great transfer from what I'd been before.
Yeah, absolutely.
Became a master franchisees of a brand called Park Regis, which is one that's been built at Birmingham and Five Ways Roundabout. So we were the management company that opened that. And then when I left that, I then went to Anytime Fitness. So subsequently, my last role was at Anytime, and now I work as a consultant for a number of companies. I'm on the board of the Scottish Chamber of Commerce.
Oh wow.
Um, I am the chair of the Scottish Chamber of Commerce in the Cairngorm National Park. I sit on the finance committee for the Scottish Chamber of Commerce and the Economic Forum for the Scottish Chamber of Commerce. I work quite closely along with my colleagues with John Swinney and Kate Forbes. That means we get to go to Holyrood, which is just interesting. That's all I can say. I consult for a company called Ned on Board, who do a lot of training for chair people, stroke, non-exec directors, all about governance, ESG, risk registers, all those kind of things that are
Yeah.
perceived to be boring, but actually you can make them quite commercially sound. And then I consult for a few other businesses, one of them in particular, which I spoke to Russell about the other day, which is Synergy Dance, which is
Yeah,
do a lot of inclusive for people with disabilities,
Oh
particularly
wow.
children on the SEN register. And I think that's something that the industry hasn't quite grasped at the moment, where, we've almost got a tsunami of children coming through that have got some challenges around ADHD, non-verbal, all those kind of things, which at the moment we're not necessarily recognizing. And I think that's something both morally and opportunistically we should start to think about a bit differently. Because let's face it, this, you know, the 16, 17, 15s, 10s, 12-year-olds are the customers of the future. And, you
Oh,
know,
100%.
we've mentioned before, we do celebrate our 16% penetration, but maybe there's an 84% opportunity.
Well, I think Stuart,
That was a long answer to a quick question, so I apologize.
Stuart, I thought about you the other day actually on that business, because I went in to do a club tour with I won't say the operator, but they're £170 membership, so they're a high-end operator. Went in to look to potentially join. I touched on my son, so I think, as I said, my youngest son is a non-verbal autistic boy. So I was talking to them actually about their provision for him. So could he come in and, you know, what children's classes? Because they were saying a lot about, we do a lot of children's stuff and it's great, so your kids can come in. Well, I said, this is the situation with my child. So what do you have? And the salesperson sort of babbled and showed me a room, and I said, okay, so who would be looking after him in this room, or what would he be doing? And he sort of babbled a little bit more, and then he tried to get another girl to help him. And it just, the upshot was, I just said, is there any SEND provision here? And he said, no, not really. And so, okay, I mean, this is if £170 operator at that end of the market isn't considering this at all, then yes, one, there's a massive opportunity there, but secondly, it's quite sad, really, that our biggest operators aren't considering it. So how are we expecting anyone else to look at it? But anyway, I thought of you when I was doing that club tour.
And to be quite honest with you, you're absolutely correct. You know, the challenge of the industry sometimes is if we're really serious about growing the business, we've got to look at different markets. And to me, that's a big opportunity. And, you know, I could say, well, I work, you know, consultancy for the company, but I also believe in the product. So I think it's much easier to support people if you believe in it. You know, my grandson is the same situation. He's been diagnosed with ADHD. You know, the tragedy I see about this situation is, and ironically, it ties in with the bigger picture around the NHS. You know, there's been prescription for drugs at children at 6, 7, 8 years old. I mean,
Yeah.
the world's almost gone mad. I mean, how can that be affordable going forward? I mean, it's bad enough giving people drugs when they're, you know, 30, 40, but now we've got a situation where we'll be administering drugs to people at sort of 6, 7, 8, 9. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying, because I'm not a physician, I don't know the answer to it, but I'm sure there's opportunities of a balance between the two. And, you know, if I think about the Breakfast Club, the Breakfast Clubs are celebrated. And by the way, I've subscribed to the fact that no child should go to school hungry. I get that. The challenge is, if you look in some cases, the sponsors are looking at it as a commercial opportunity. So Greggs and Tesco's, bless them, it may never happen without them, but I'm not sure that's the most nutritious opportunity. But also, if you think about children's obesity, children in school, we're feeding the monster. 50% of children at school are now becoming obese. And what we're doing is, in some cases, giving them food, which, by the way, I understand that. So I'm not, you know, I fully understand that. But what about giving them 15 minutes of food and 15 minutes of exercise on an inclusive basis? So using your example, Russ, you know, the danger of providing SEND activity, or activity for blind, deaf, whatever, people in wheelchairs, you suddenly, as you pointed out, that what you call inclusivity becomes exclusive. So they will take your son and say, well, there you go, you can work out in the aerobic studio on his own, and therefore that's the program for him. That can't happen. The bottom line is that exclusivity has to be inclusivity. So if you can provide a program that satisfies all children in the same room, the irony is, and I don't obviously can't prognose your son's situation. Sure, he'd be happier to be working out with 10 other people than necessarily sitting in a room on his own. I'm not saying that would completely solve the problem, but you know, by nature, a lot of this is about communication skills. It's about interaction. It's about interaction with other people. And we're living with the fact that COVID has caused a lot of problems for children that are sort of maybe 4, 5, 6, 7 at the time of COVID, where they were in houses for 2 years on their own and they never interacted, or they didn't have to socialize. So I think, you know, we could probably talk about that probably for most of this presentation, because I feel quite passionate about it, and hopefully.
No, absolutely. And obviously, we spoke about it the other day. And whilst, you know, that coming into this wasn't going to be one of the focuses, I do think at the very least the industry should be considering it and actually how they can cater for that. And Ryan, of course, it goes back to the conversation we're having prior to going on air about our governing bodies and how they should be looking at, again, the 83, 84 odd percent of people who aren't exercising in this country, and everyone, one hat doesn't fit all, and we do have people and, you know, children, and those children are going to become adults, and we don't have a provision for them at the moment. You know, I go into clubs and there's no provision. I go into schools and there's no breakfast club that can actually provide those things. So again, we could probably talk for absolutely hours on that, but I think that's a very, very interesting one, and one that just as a bit of a soundbite that just our industry should be focusing somewhat more on than it does at the moment. But anyway, sorry,
just
Ryan.
interested on that one. Sorry, Stuart. Just interested on that one. I've been speaking to David Eggleton. I don't know whether you know him. He's got a program called Deaf Gym, and he was, because you don't think about it as an able-bodied person, you go into an environment and you're just able to communicate and whatever. And he was saying the challenges a deaf person faces just going into a gym. One, from a communication point of view, if they're not verbal, because not all deaf people, it's all sign language as well. And he says it's really difficult. And I had a friend who was registered blind, and he had the same issue. So if you're registered blind and you want to train, there's no provision for that. There's no support for it. And unless you, I mean, he was very confident. He was incredible bloke. So he could go into a gym, but it's very difficult. So Sen absolutely massive as well. But if you look at disability overall, I don't think we really
Absolutely.
provide.
And ultimately, you know, Synergy Dance provide exercise program, and there's obviously other people out there for all sorts of seated yoga, you know, Pilates, all those kind of things. And I think, and I know people are probably shouting at the screen or shouting at the podcast saying, yeah, but it's not very commercial. Well, there's 8-9 million people registered disabled, so I'm sorry, but it could be commercial, and yeah, because it's hard work. But you know, my view is that yeah, it's hard work. Yeah, it is. That's right. And the irony
And
is
running
that
a gym normally is hard work, Stuart. So
of course it is. Exactly. So I think if you accept the fact that we've got a skill set shortage in the industry, which is pretty not unique, right? Well, we're not helping the problem, because what we're doing is we're not supporting children at school that are, you know, either leavers or about to leave with understanding the social skills that are required, because we're not providing the activity for them. So I think, sorry.
No, I was going to say, don't you think some of this actually is down to the fact of how we promote our businesses in health and fitness? So, sort of flipping it onto the commercial side, we almost become a sales business rather than a product and service business. So we spend so much time worrying about the commercials, where actually, if we had the service delivery now, whether it's normal service to able-bodied people, you if you get that right, the commercials actually work themselves out because you drive more membership. But what we're doing so much, we're just looking at this idea of just selling membership. So our marketing is always fit people and you're like, that's why we don't get the 83%, because we're focused on the same 17% or whatever all the time. And it doesn't encourage, because we just think, well, that's where the money is. And all we're doing is cannibalizing ourselves, and the same people go around the different clubs. But
Yeah,
commercials
right. And I guess,
actually worthwhile.
but I guess that's the point. Though, again, we were touching on it earlier on the big box players, and actually, we have operators in this country who run facilities, and if they had the right support and drive, actually, instead of just looking at a large membership number, they would probably say, okay, we can support this, we can adapt our product, and we can do this, if they felt they were on that footing. But actually, I don't think there are many operators in this country who are on that footing, because they probably know that just around the corner, whether or not it's 3 months, 6 months, they've got no protection against a 5-10,000 member behemoth coming in who are only going to care about membership volumes. But you want these facilities at the moment to spend time and effort, you know, developing like that. I think this is the whole structural issue that we have around clubs in this country. So I think that, you know, it's a separate issue, but it destabilizes all the existing players that we have in this country and doesn't allow them to think far enough in advance. And sorry, this is me talking quite a lot. I'm well aware that we've got Stuart, so I'd love your take on that as well, Stuart.
I know, listen, I get that. I mean, I think it's in my opinion, and therefore I say that because that's the statement that they use on Radio 5. And people could question my opinion, and I'm happy to have that questioned because I think debate is something that we struggle with now. And debate to me is very healthy. And
Definitely.
ultimately, you debate things, you fresh them out, and then basically you come up with a solution. I'm not sure I like the principle, well, I beg to differ, all that kind of stuff. I mean, the bottom line is you've got to kind of get there. But it's about time the industry recognizes that we're not a commodity. And I think that's the challenge. I mean, we are not a commodity-based business. We're an experience business, yeah. And therefore, we have to accept the fact that we're an experienced business. Maybe we'll move the needle a lot quicker and then grow the market a lot better because we'll create experiences for people. And
I'm a massive believer of that, Stuart. Coming from a hotel background like yours, and this is probably a good time to pick on it because I come from Marriott, obviously you're Hilton, very, very similar style brands. And it was all about the service delivery, all about service delivery, all about the client, make the client happy, whatever, create experiences. And I think fitness or health and fitness industry doesn't do that. And I guess from a question point of view, it would be what would you say is the biggest difference between your experiences in, say, Hilton and those over to, I guess, LivingWell, because LivingWell sat within that hotel environment like our Marriott clubs did. What's the difference between that and then, say, the Anytime experience and what you did to sort of change that around?
Yeah, I think the difficulty is that we have to accept that ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, if we are accept that we're an experience-based business, then we need a different type of skill set. My observation between working with people in hotels, which ironically is probably more than working people within health clubs, so maybe I could give that as a maybe it's my expertise, is people in hotels were qualified but not overqualified. They were actually very well qualified in dealing with people. And, that was one of the skills that I then found as a difficulty in the leisure industry. And I think the danger is we talk too much about complicated words like attrition and things like that. I don't even know what that means, by the way. I think sometimes we overcomplicate the industry. In my view, it's very simple, and I think that's something we talked about a lot in Anytime Fitness is how many people do we have, how much are they paying, and how long are they staying, right? So if we have those as the three measurements of the industry, we might think a bit differently around how that, how we manage the business. So how many people do we have? Yes, obviously that's important. When I went to Anytime, it was, well, we've got 1,000 members. I used to say, well, what's the yield? And they used to say, what do you mean by the yield? How do you even work it out? I say, well, it's very simple. You divide them out of direct debit plus the yearly payments, and you divide it by how many members you've got. And the irony is that if you look at that and say, well, our headline price is 46, but our yield is 26, well, you've got a problem because we're
Absolutely
paying a lot less than they should be. And that might be the reason why you probably don't give them an experience. And then you say to people, well, what's the length of stay or the length of membership, right? And you say, well, I don't know. I say, well, that's the problem because you can commercialize. If your membership's 6 months or 12 months and people are staying 9 or 15, then you can commercialize that. You can say, well, actually, normally people leave after 12 months and our average length of stay is 15 months. That's an extra 3 months. That's value. There's a value there. So I think if you start to look at that in a bit of a different way, then that might make your focus differently. I think in the industry, again, in my opinion, in some cases, people are very qualified, but not qualified in dealing with people. I used to work on the gyms and people used to say to me, oh, I'm a personal trainer. And I said, well, that's fantastic. How many clients have you got? Oh, I've got about 7. Okay, so how many do you need to make it work? They said, well, I don't know. I said, well, okay, so what's your plan? And they used to say, well, actually, I'm going to take level 4. I said, listen, no disrespect, but do not take level 4. Go and take a marketing course or a sales course or a customer service course. Do not take level 4, because if you do, then the bottom line is you'll become a rocket scientist. And the problem is most of the people you're dealing with are not rocket scientists. and they just want to get either thinner or fitter or healthier or whatever. So actually, if you're not careful, you become more, the words you use lose people very early in the process, and
Yeah,
therefore people just deselect themselves. You have to get that balance between that natural speak and what makes a difference to the customer, then actually saying, well, you know, your body mass index, your calisthenics, your resting heartbeat is way off, and people go, I don't even know what that is. So I think it's that kind of transition that we maybe need to think about. And don't get me wrong, I think that, you know, people like Paul Bedford and Guy Griffiths, good luck to them. You know, they make a lot of money on the back of We Never Learn. So to be quite honest with you, you know, ultimately good for them. Keep going. But the bottom line is that, you know, retention is not, to me, is irrelevant. What's more important is engagement. Stop using the word
absolutely.
retention. Use these guys to help you in that process, because statistically they can prove if you have more engagement with people, then they will stay longer.
I
As
remember
a,
one of Paul Bedford's stats, and this is when I was at Marriott, so years ago, but it was something like if you just spoke to a member, whether it be at reception or in the gym, pardon me, once in a month, it extended their membership by up to 2 months. And you're
absolutely.
like going, that's once. Yet how many clubs do we have now that have turnstiles where you sign yourself in, nobody says hello to you, you can walk in
Mm.
and out of a club and nobody in the club will speak to you. And then you're looking at your retention or your length of stay and going, oh, it's well, I wonder why. All you're offering is a treadmill to run on or a squat rack to work in. You're not actually engaging with that person to want to help them, support them, find out what their goals are, or even just to have a general chit chat. Because most of the people that go into gyms, I mean, some people just put the headphones on, they just want to do their own thing. And but most people will engage with you if you speak to them. They want that environment, they want to feel welcome. Clubs with great retention are those clubs that actively engage in their members and got really good relationships. They know their members' names, they say hello, all that sort of stuff. It's incredible.
Well, it's the ability to segment your business in the first place and almost pull together some avatars based on people's profile. So, you know, think about it, even going back to the LivingWell days, we used to say, well, though, you know, 10% of our membership are what's called Trojans. Bottom line is they wear the headsets. They know more about the industry than we probably will ever know about the industry. They are absolutely, you know, fitness professionals, blah, 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 blah. And at the end of the day, just leave them alone. But the
Yeah.
90% opportunity, you know, people that are reluctantly obliged was actually the 50% of the market. And if they're reluctantly obliged, you've got to accept the fact that they're on the edge of leaving before they even join, right?
Mm.
Ultimately, to me, that's a big opportunity. So it's having your ability to identify those people and not just having them as a marketing tool, which is important as well, by the way, because you can then pitch your marketing around the market you want to attract. But you then have to take the time to take your people on the gym floor and say, look, this is why we're doing this. Isn't marketing speak. This is an opportunity for you to interact with customers, which actually make your day better, and it'll certainly make their day better. But so to me, that's the opportunity that we probably in some cases miss out on. And it's simple but not easy. So
Well, I
like,
think that's the a very good point that you made there, in that we've sort of lost them before they've come in, because most people don't want to be there in the first place. They walk into, if they wanted to be there, they'd have been doing this their whole life, and it would have just been a natural thing. Something in their environment, whether or not it's weight gain, whether or not it's they've had children, whether or not they've had illness, or something has driven them to come into the club,
mhm.
and it's and the setup, and I worry about the setup going forwards. And you fast forward another 10 years, that the clubs, 90%, God knows how what percentage of the clubs will be people who have no interest in finding out what that motivation is for those people to step foot into the gym in the first place. And it will just purely be numbers, even more so than it is now. And it's bad enough at the moment. But going forwards, it's if you sign up, okay, well, if you stay for 3 months or 6 months, really doesn't matter that much, because we've got a price point that we can stack them up high, and there'll be someone else who's going to take that membership down the line anyway. And that's what we're kind of sleepwalking into at the moment, and that worries me. And it goes around to all the things we've talked about in terms of the demographic of people that we get into clubs, and how we don't target people, and how when we do get them in there, we don't find out. It only takes going into a club in January. Half the people definitely don't want to be in that gym, and a lot of them are quite vocal at the moment as well, certainly in my gym, about not really wanting to be there. But it's January, and So it's like, okay, well, that person isn't going to be here in a month if you don't do something about it. So why do they, how, they've come here for a reason. They're feeling bad over Christmas, whatever it might be, or there's a longer term underlying issue, and we don't really find out what it is, and we just let people fade in and fade out. And I think we're only going in one direction in that, and it's not in the good one.
Yeah, and the problem is that we still have this cultural value about 3 guest passes are time wasters. I can't get my mind around that. How anybody could give me a free pass for a gym? I go home, I pack my bag, put my kit in it, walk to the gym or drive to the gym, get into the process, work out in the club, and leave, and I'm a time waster. I cannot get my mind. That's a bit like saying I made an wedding inquiry, but I'm not engaged, or I don't have a girlfriend or a boyfriend, or I mean,
It amazes me though, Stuart, how many times they'll do guest passes or free trials or whatever, but then they don't give them a tour. They don't try to find out their goals. They don't actually. They literally walk in and go, sign there. The gym's up. Let me just quickly run you around so you know where everything is. And then they don't speak to them at the end. And you're like going, you've spent all this money on your marketing for starters. So even if you're purely commercial, you spent the money on the marketing. You've got that person in, which isn't easy to do. They've
absolutely.
walked in your club with their kit, like you say. They've spent the time to come. And then you don't give them the time. And you're sort of going, what you should be doing is if you've got a body analysis, get them on the body analysis, get them to understand where they're at, make them feel like a member for the day, and that you're going to look after them, you're going to show them how, because that's what they want. Like you say, they haven't just done it on the whim going, yeah, I'm bored, I'm going to go to the gym today. They've done it for a reason. And it's like, well, when they come in, you've got to then make them feel special, give them a
100%.
reason to join your club.
Yeah.
They're not time wasters. You might get the odd person that, I don't know, lives in London, happens to be in Sheffield and needs somewhere else to train, so blags a free day. But that's rare.
It's very rare. And I think the danger is some cases we've got to accept that, okay, let's spin it on its head and say it's a try before you buy campaign, right? So get away with the word free. It's a try before you buy. Okay. So if it's a try before you buy, then you have to qualify the lead. So the person that lives in Sheffield that's using their so-called try before you buy guest pass in London, well, you're qualifying them in the first place and saying, well, okay, we're happy for you to visit the club. We're really excited about you coming, but how would you believe that you're going to join because you live in London or you live in Leeds?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
you're qualifying the lead. So I'm not saying it's lazy because that's a bit of a rash statement, but what I'm trying to say is we have to accept that we have to train people to accept that these things are an opportunity. And the irony is we can make them hot leads as opposed to, well, the way time wasters a lot better. And it's the way people make an acquisition now. We have to accept the industry has to move with the times. I
Yeah.
remember 15 years ago talking about people joining online, and people thought I was like, had something wrong with me. I mean, when I worked in Canada, and this is a great statistic, right? So we worked with the American call centers.
Right.
So Atlanta had 550 people taking calls for reservations. New
Wow.
York had 650. Los Angeles had 1,000 people. In the time I was in Canada in those 4 years, Atlanta went down to 250. New York went down to whatever the number was, halved, and the same with Los Angeles because people were buying online. They didn't want to. They didn't want to necessarily. They still wanted to talk to people, some people, but most people wanted to buy their accommodation online. And I think as an industry, we have to accept now those people that come in and have a try before you buy might not buy at the time, but they may go home and buy. But we don't make sure that they can do that because that's culturally how people buy now. I mean, we have to
That was the
accept.
big thing Whitbread did when they sold Marriott back to Marriott. They obviously went and took it's Travelodge or Travelin. I can't remember which one they took, but they just went right. We're going online, and now 98% of their business is booked online. They they
100%.
they hardly have any reservations team. They were talking to the managing director a few years back, and I was listening, and that was their big thing. They were like going, "Well, this is what we're doing, but it's all going online." And yeah, pretty much all their business now is online. And
That's hoteliers, 20, 30 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, we used to say, no way, people will always want to talk to somebody as a reservation. Now, the irony is, there's some cases we do, because nothing more frustrates me when you have to press 6 and then go to 7 and then get to another thing and then blah, 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 because you actually just want to speak to a person, which I think is still required in some cases. But in most cases, people want to make that acquisition and they want to make it simple and they want to make it not necessarily in the club because they feel pressurized.
Yeah,
So I think, and I think about my time at any time. If I look at what we used to do, even the space of 4 years, 3.5 years there, I mean, online sales went from something like, I don't know, maybe I can't remember the numbers, 30 grand to like 100 and odd grand a month. I mean, it just exponentially went crazy because that's how people wanted to make their acquisition. So it was really telling the clubs, look, there is not many time wasters out there. There's people that just buy in a different way, and therefore you've just got to change your sales technique.
absolutely. Now, one thing talking about anytime, because I think this is a really, really good point to come back to this, because obviously you've done all your hotel stuff and we living well, went into anytime. A really interesting point because they've grown massively, very, very quickly. And I think from my experience, I was working with Russ at the time as a consultant and working with the new clubs and stuff just before you came in. And the standards probably weren't quite there. And I know when you came in, suddenly standards and process and everything. What sort of when you went in there, what did you identify? Sort of go, okay, this is what we need to change to drive the business forward, and how was that sort of implementation process?
Yeah, I mean, to be quite honest with you, every single job I've had in the past, it's all about the people. Yeah. So I think you
Yeah,
cannot forget that that's what it's about. And whether that's the people that are the customers or the people that actually, I work on the basis of the fact that there's two sets of customers. There's customers that pay all our wages, whether I'm chief exec or not, and there's people that work for you, and they're the internal customers. And you have to make sure that they're as happy or as motivated or as educated or supported as much as anybody else. And sometimes we can forget that.
yeah,
And ultimately, to me, that's the most important. We're only as strong as our weakest link. So I think when I went into any time, one of the things I might have observed might have been there wasn't necessarily many people what they called head office, which I changed very quickly to support
yeah,
office. And you might say, well, that's semantics, but I think it's cultural as well about, well, what are we here for? We're not a head office. We're here to support the businesses, and without the businesses, we don't have a business, right? So we have to just change
absolutely.
our mentality about, it's one of the biggest lies in the world, isn't it? I'm here for head. I'm from head office, and I'm here to help you, right? So ultimately, that's the challenge sometimes. So my view is culturally, you have to change that and accept that obviously the businesses, whether that be owned businesses or franchise businesses, people that work in the support office are there to support those businesses. Unless there's a secret cellar downstairs that they're making gold bars in or something like that, we didn't know about, and
Yeah,
that's supporting the business. But to me, that's very, very important. So I think the people, and I say both internally and externally, so what I would call the franchisees, um, definitely needed a lot more attention and support. And internally, we needed to make sure we had people that were able to do that. I think what gets measured does not get done. So ultimately, say what gets measured gets done. Well, if it does, can you show me the secret recipe for that? Because I've never known measuring something and it suddenly gets done. I've known measuring something and it gets exposed. And then once it gets exposed, then you basically got in a process and procedure and systems um, to then show what show you what the output's going to be. I think KPIs, simple KPIs, which I mentioned earlier, how many people have we got, how much are they paying, how long are they staying, um, is easy said but difficult to implement, because at the end of the day, you've got to coach people, support people to get them to understand that. We put in from simple things at the support office that said franchisee sentiment, franchisees profitability, franchisees will open more clubs. And for us, that was quite an important mantra. I mean, I'm
yeah,
sure Russell, as a franchisee, you might not, you might not think that, but ultimately for us, changing that, changing that narrative, it doesn't happen overnight. But clearly, the happier the franchisee, the more profitable the franchisee,
Mm.
or businesses they open. I mean, when you think about it, it's very simplistic, but if you have to think about that when every process or procedure that we implemented was put through that washing machine. So, for
yeah,
example, was it going to grow? Was it going to give us more members spending more money, staying longer? Was it going to improve profitability, franchisee sentiment, and make them open more clubs? So those kind of things was something that we had to really have a setback and say, look, guys, we've got to start thinking in a different way. And that doesn't happen overnight. Culture is talked a lot about, but culture is something that is sometimes unexplainable. But the best way I explain it is when you recruit somebody, there's three things that matter. What's their qualifications in some cases?
Yeah.
What's their experience? And do they have magic? And to me, the magic is what makes the difference really in a customer facing business. Yeah. And magic is probably more the culture around their ability to make sure that they can communicate, support people, accept why they're there, understand the KPIs and understands what influence. I mean, how many times do we meander down a road where we don't actually know what we're being measured against? So my view is that if we don't know where we're going, all roads will lead to nowhere. So my view is that it's just refocusing in that process and ultimately making a few changes. Sadly, ultimately we had to bring in a few people that probably knew a bit more about the industry. Not that I think that's the panacea for success sometimes, but I think it helps. I mean, if you're going to sell ice cream, it's probably good to have people that know how to make it.
Oh, 100%. It's the amount of times we go into me and Ross are going to clubs, and the challenge you have quite often, especially in a franchise business, is the guy who's the franchisee doesn't actually, quite often is the case, isn't from the industry, and so it's a matter of setting it up so they've got key players within their team that are.
100%. And at the end of the day, if you don't know how to do something, you need to find somebody that can, and you need to listen to them. And that's the danger sometimes, is just because we are in charge or senior, or in my case, chief exec, doesn't mean to say I know everything. I mean, I think it's important. The more the senior you get, the more inquisitive you should become, not less
Wasn't it
inquisitive.
Russell Branson who said hire people that are cleverer than you?
Yeah, I mean, and ultimately support them and then learn from them. I think it's not, I don't think it's just about employing people that are cleverer than you. I think it's you having the ability to accept, I'm now going to learn what they know,
Yeah.
Yeah,
so I can, I can work with them, I can manage them and still get them to perform. Because those people that are cleverer than you, the danger, if you're not careful, they get cast adrift. And my view is you've got to be very careful about that. And I describe it as like, as a chief exec, you've got to have a fishing rod, and the fishing rod has all different lines on it. And those are the people that work for you. And some people are very good and they're very qualified, and you can cast them out. You can see them bobbing around in the distance, but occasionally you've still got to bring them in,
yeah,
because if
yeah.
you bring them in, they're
Mm.
going to go, well, you don't spend any time with me. You say I'm good at what I do, but I want your time as well. You have to be in a situation where man management or people management, which is probably more appropriate nowadays, is very, very important. And I think the danger is sometimes you think, well, that person's very good at what they do, I'll just let them get on with it. Well, that's not really the way they really probably want to be managed. I think the recognition is what motivates them. And I think at the end of the day, if you bring them in and you support them, not as often as maybe other people, but the point was you still need to keep, supporting them, and sitting down with them on a reasonably regular basis and setting some, even if you're patting them on the back saying it's great, recognition is so important. So
Well, Russ knows this a lot. I mean, obviously, Russ had, was it 6 any times, Russ?
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
So you'll have seen the changes that Stuart would have
Yeah,
made.
I mean, I was very central at the time in terms of supplier, so supporting the franchisee base as well as having my own set of clubs. And I think Stuart, I think you probably undersold the impact that you had on the franchise. And one of the reasons why you are guest number one on this series is coming in. So Ryan, to paint a picture of what Stuart came into on the first Anytime Fitness conference, Stuart. Jokingly came on stage in a soldier's hard hat, because that's what he was stepping into, and and the amount of issues, and I think the lack of, and I say without going too far down it, the lack of empathy that maybe was in place before, and how far away from being franchisee centric the business had become. Um, I think that's all the things that Stuart had to deal with before he could implement any of those other changes. Is just getting the franchisees back, getting the communication back, getting the trust back. And that was the biggest task for me, which he done very well, because the franchise, and like I say, I was involved at Anytime Fitness from day one in the UK all the way up until, just over a year ago. And, from the point of it starting small and having great people involved, James Cotton, doing a great job in the early stages. We then worked together, out supporting franchisees. It then just had a period in between where it went volume as opposed to quality, and it just lost it. And that's all the stuff that Stuart had to come in. And you can't fix it from day one, but he walked into it from day one and had to build that process up. And I think, Stuart, we spoke, I think, a couple of days ago, and talking about, I'd almost view your tenure in line with Neil Randall as well, because you brought in Neil, you worked together, you worked really well. Neil continued that process that you'd put in place, and those are some really good years for the franchise. And there's so much growth and so much progress was made from the sentiment, from what the franchisee base, how we felt, the confidence in the brand, the kind of sites that we were opening, the processes that we were putting into place, the new, not just franchisee but member centric approach that we were looking at, was quite a seismic difference. So I just think, whilst you sort of touched on the changes you made, I think you've undersold yourself a little bit there, and that's from someone who was not just dealing with my own set of clubs, because we'd got to the point where we were just dealing with a bubble. We were like, we're over here, it's not happening. It's not happening. We're not being told the things we need to. We'll work it out ourselves. We're over here. And then I'm working with a franchisee base who don't necessarily have that. They don't have a set of clubs. They don't have an infrastructure. They need this. They need the support. They need the direction. And it just wasn't happening because we were looking at how many clubs can we open. And that's just a road to ruin, which you really stopped. And yeah. Anyway, that's enough.
No, I think
That's
it's
enough. Blowing enough smoke there, Stuart.
I think it's interesting because people would ask me the question around, because I've been a franchisee, right? So I can empathise. I can't sympathise, but I can empathise. And I look at it and say, well, what's the difference between a chief exec of a private sector and a chief exec of a franchise? I think if you start to delineate it, you make a big mistake. I think at the end of the day, it's the same thing, right? And you've got to think the same way, based around making the clubs as successful as possible, which is what you do in the private sector, right? I mean, why wouldn't you? Yeah. So therefore, think about some of the simplicity, or not simplicity, but certainly the introduction of automation. You think of some of the things that we did with Clubwise, which were in theory revolutionary in comparison to doing with it before. And, and ultimately that did take got a bit of resistance because of what you said earlier. Some of the people had not yet hadn't worked in the industry and were running clubs within the industry. And that transition was quite difficult for them. So I would take the statement that let's put the power of the membership back into the hands of the customer. I mean, that was like, you've got to be joking. We can't do that. Well, we'll lose people. I said, what do you mean we'll lose people? So, well, we can't allow them to freeze online. We can't allow them to cancel online. We can't allow them to do things like that. It would be mental because they're going to leave. And I'm thinking, what do you mean by that? I said, we're not actually talking to people. We're not talking to customers anyway. They're going to leave because they're not spoken to. They're not going to leave because they can now be online. I said, and the irony of that was a transition process that took quite a while for us to introduce that process, which obviously in theory revolutionized the way that the customers thought about the business, and in turn put the simplicity back. And actually the automation gave us more discipline. So for example, I did an exercise about freeze online and people were very nervous about it. But if I look at the stats, I mean, I looked at the stats and said to Clubwise, how many people do we have on freeze? I think at the time we had 14,000 to 15,000 people on freeze.
Wow.
Now remember, the average price of a freeze was £10 less VAT, so it's £8. And I said, okay, so what's the average yield of the freeze? It was £1. So of the 15,000 people, half of them, if not more than half, weren't paying. So that was the irony of moving freeze to online, meant that actually you had to go through the process, you had to upload the documents, or you weren't allowed to do it. Whereas taking it in some cases, and it's not unique to Anytime Fitness, by the way, because you can inherit that in any business, there were people being put on freeze just to keep them on the system.
Yeah.
And because some managers were bonused on numbers, not on value, right? So if I got 1,000 members, every one above it, I would get more money, not the fact that we were paying. So, and that's not, again, unique to that experience because I used
But
to
it's
get.
also weak managers, isn't it? Someone will come in and say, "I want to freeze for whatever," and they just go, "Yes." There's not
Mm.
any caveat bit or reason
Yeah,
But
behind it, so you get a lot of.
it's also a little bit of ego there, I guess, from the club owner, particularly if it's not as profitable as they like. But I've got a 1,500 member club here, so it's all's good.
combination of all the above. I mean, I think it's, uh, and I don't say this rudely, Ryan. It's the danger is it's unfair to probably say that the manager. Sometimes it could be fear. So what I mean by
Yeah,
that is that they could be doing it because actually they were targeted on having 1,000
Mm.
members. It could be financial because every member above 1,000, blah blah blah. So the irony of it is that those people that were working the system were probably more competent than the people that weren't working the system, if you could argue. You know what I mean? I mean, you could say that a person that does cyber crime is probably more intelligent than the person that doesn't, if you see what I mean. So it's all relevant
yeah,
about the process, isn't it? So I think it's really having strong, robust processes in place that allow people to do the right thing. I mean, ultimately,
yeah.
that's important, and therefore just keep measuring them doing the right thing on a regular basis. So I think that so that gives you a bit of a lens or a bit of a thought about my journey when I initially went there.
And just on the
Mm.
back of that, because a lot of the businesses we're starting to work with are new start out franchises. So got one or two clubs, or even starting from scratch. What would you say? I don't know if you had to pick three things from your time to well, all your roles for these guys running, because they're now the CEOs of these small franchises. What would you say is probably the one, two, three things that they should make sure they get right from the outset?
I think the first thing they need to get right is get the right people. I think that's very, very important. At the end of the day, but not just employ the people that know more than you do. I think that's important initially, but then learn what they know, because at the
Yeah,
end of the day, it's about understanding every single dynamic of your business. So if cast my mind back to when I was a hotelier or whatever, and I was running an individual unit, so maybe a hotel when I was a hotel manager. I knew everything about the hotel. I knew where the stop valve was. I knew where the boiler was. I knew where it switched off. I knew where it switched on. I knew where the electricity system was. I knew what the maintenance guy knew. I didn't do what the maintenance guy did, but I knew what he knew, right?
yeah, yeah,
There would come a time where I could not be held to ransom around, well, the maintenance guy's on holiday, but nobody knows where the stop valve is. Meanwhile, the hotel's flooding. So don't get me wrong, that's not because I'm a control freak. It's more because I want to make sure that you've got your finger on the pulse. So you might well employ the right people, which is great, which is obviously a good starting point. But the point is then make sure that you manage them accordingly and therefore support them. But you've got to be there. The bottom
yeah,
line is you cannot not be there, because if you're not in your business, then that's a challenge. I also think you've got to be careful about, if you employ the right people, spend as much time working on the business as you do working in the business.
yeah,
I think that's very, very important that you start to look at what's happening in your business and what the next steps are. But more importantly, make sure that you're joining the dots of what's happening in your business, and then that's what's happening in your bank account, because ultimately cash flow is one of the most important things, right? And
yeah,
therefore, the right cash flow, then the business can't survive. Don't spend a lot of time, spend the right time on governance. So do the right things that you're supposed to do as a director or as a chief exec, but make those things more commercially as an opportunity. So, for example, if you have a risk register, what you need to do is make that risk register tick the governance box, but make it more commercial and make it more of the risk within the business, not just the health and safety risks. So,
gotcha.
people are a risk,
Yeah,
cash flow is a risk, not being able to pay the bills is a risk. And if you look at most people's risk register, either they don't have one, or when they do have one, it's just ticking a box and it's actually covering things like health and safety and all that kind of stuff, which is important. But the point is there's other risks in your business that actually without them, you won't actually survive. So you've got to
yeah.
make sure that, yes, of course, it's
Pointless looking at health and safety if your business is closed, isn't it?
yeah, exactly. There's no point, but exactly what you've said. So, and never lose sight of what matters in your business. So, yeah, of course, the people matter, and you can transition your. So, if I think about it, if I go back to the days at LivingWell where I operated a business with 350,000 members across 12, 14 different countries. When I took that business on, we probably employed, I don't know, maybe 20 people, 30 people. When I left, we had about 3,000, 3,500 people.
Wow.
When I first took the job on, I used to think, well, I've got to spend a lot of time making sure the customers are right and and I get that. But eventually I took the view, well, I've got to make sure 3,500 people are right, because if they're right, then actually the customers will be right anyway. So I think
Yeah.
sometimes it's that kind of transition of I've got my finger on the pulse, I'm managing lots of things, to then saying I've got to find the right people to manage those things, but not let go completely, but keep
We
my
were
own.
always taught at Marriott, look after your people who look after the customers keep coming back. That was almost their motto
Yeah,
that you were
which
taught
looks
from
after
day
your
one.
share price, which is another thing that people used to say, oh, your return on investment, you know what I mean? So to me, that's very, very important. And I think one of the things that's dangerous in business sometimes is we do the things we like doing. And the
Mm.
irony is the things that we like doing are probably not going to add a lot of value. The things that we don't like doing are probably going to add more value. I say that to people that in management when I do a lot of mentoring. The problem with management is if you're about to do something and you don't feel uncomfortable about it, or those butterflies in your stomach, it's probably not worth doing. Because the irony is that those
Point.
things that actually matter are the things that you get more worked up about. And the irony is they give you a better return on investment. But you've got to accept that. Yeah, of course, we all want to do the good things, but sometimes you've got to do the things that are not the good things, which ironically add more value.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, obviously, we're running out of time, but I do want to cover in terms of what you're doing now, Stu, because I mean, obviously, your career is amazing. We could probably have this podcast for about 4 hours with all the knowledge you've got, and we could even get onto your Highland cattle, which we were talking about earlier, which is but. In terms of what you do with working with businesses, obviously you touched at the start that you work with Neds and all that sort of stuff. But in terms of your business, what's the main thing that you're helping out with? That if people wanted to get in touch, that's the thing that you focus on.
Well, I find when you're getting yourself into a senior position, it's a lonely life, right? And therefore, at the end of the day, more often than not, you spend a lot of time looking in your wing mirror or looking in your rear view mirror and say, who do I got to talk to? Because the danger is that if
Mm.
you work for a company that has its board, then the difficulty sometimes is it's quite difficult to express your concerns or your challenges with the chair people or with the board. It's about your ability to manage the board, which some people underestimate, in the respect of that's something that we spend a lot of time with Ned on board is teaching or about to teach chief execs as to how to manage up the way, which is, as we've proven by Ruben Amorim and people like that. At Chelsea, they probably didn't manage up the way as well as they could have done. And therefore, at the end of the day, they're no longer in their position. So I spend a lot of time supporting people with strategic planning, spend a lot of time with people that are looking for a mentor, in the respect of, and sometimes we don't know we need it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
sometimes thinking, oh, mentoring, I don't need to do, etc. I'm registered as a with NatWest Accelerator program, so I do quite a bit of mentoring to people that are entrepreneurs that have either set up their businesses and they're small businesses and they're about to go to medium, or they're medium businesses that are about to scale.
yeah,
And basically, people look at your CV and then request you to support them. I mean, that's on a, I'm happy to do it on a complimentary basis initially because that way then it's building relationships, etc. I have letting accommodation. So during COVID, I set up a letting business,
oh
which
wow,
I didn't have letting business at the time. I didn't have my own letting businesses. So it's called the Retreat Group, which I have a relationship support of a partnership with, and basically manage 50 houses on behalf of different people. And I now have my own letting accommodation. So we have a 3-bed and a 2-bed, of which we let to people on a short-term letting basis, of which we're quite hands-on. So
yeah.
although we have somebody that helps us, we do a lot of the work ourselves. My wife and I. We have cattle, so we have Highland cattle now.
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier, and I think it's brilliant. I love Highland cows. I just think they're well, they're just shaggy, aren't they? They're just like big
Well,
shaggy
yeah, with
animals.
long
They're
horns as
brilliant.
well, so you've got to be careful. Yeah,
Well,
so
yeah,
we don't breed them for meat. We don't breed them for commercial. We breed them purely for pedigree. So we, breed them, train them, basically then halter them and then take them down the show ring and that kind of stuff. So we go to various shows, Highland show. We had a bull that we bred from a calf, and he was very successful. So he won the Perth show. He won
Oh wow.
Highland show, whatever, first, first best in class, all that kind of stuff. So, and ultimately that meant that he was able to then be sold to then become a breeding bull, of which he's now been, that is the case. So that takes up quite a lot. Well, at the moment, it takes up a lot of time, as you can imagine, because
But I can imagine everyone thinks that that's sort of, you just breeding animals and whatever. But if you're breeding for pedigree, there's a lot involved in that in terms of records, because obviously you've got to know what the bloodline is, so you don't start matching up
that is
family
the
members
pedigree.
later
Yeah,
on down the line.
you can't have a mother and daughter, sorry, a son and a mother breeding and things like that. You've got to be very, very careful. Yeah. So yeah, pedigree is in itself within Highland cattle, which is the same, no doubt, in all cattle is. It's what the family tree going back, 50, 60 years. So because of that, we have to keep them quite separate. And we've just got two yearlings, and they take probably 3 hours a day. So they've got to be looked, trained, combed, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that in itself it takes up a lot of time. So yeah, I keep myself very busy. As I mentioned earlier, I'm on the board of the Scottish Chamber of Commerce. I'm on the board of the Cairngorm National Park Business Chamber of Commerce, which we have over 400 members. I sit on Perthshire Tourism, Aberdeenshire Tourism. So I keep myself fairly busy, quite a lot in the tourist industry because that's where I am, but do quite a bit of consultation for some people in the leisure industry. And at the end of the day, I also get involved in a number of voluntary things. I'm on the board of the Highland Games Association.
Oh wow, I bet that's fun.
Or Pitlochry. So Pitlochry Highland Games happens every year. We have 7,000 people that attend that.
Is that right? Wow.
So basically, we have to make sure that I run all the athletics. So there's cycling, 100 meters, 90 meters. There's tossing the caber, all those kind of
Yeah,
things.
that's the one everyone sort of remembers, don't they, for the Highland Games? It's
So ultimately, yeah. So all the things that would associate pipe bands, Highland dancing, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So I have an involvement in that as well. So I like to support the local community as much as you can. By nature, sometimes that's more difficult than you think because people are set in the ways. So you've got to tread carefully. A bit like mentoring, when you're mentoring people, they don't know they need it, and then you start to look at some of the things that they probably don't do, and then they get uncomfortable. But that's kind of what it's about, isn't it? It's about
yeah, exactly.
or eking out those things that you don't feel comfortable talking about, which are probably going to add the most value. So it's getting over that sort of journey of, well, all you're doing is telling me the things I do wrong. I said, well, you need to read the book called The Black Box Theory. The Black Box Theory is a book that tells you all the things that go wrong in airlines. And what they do is they get all that data and they make sure that planes don't crash. So, the black
Well, a
box.
great example of that. Have you ever seen the one about the B-52 bombers in the war? Sorry, Ross, I know you're time here, but the bombers were coming back with all these bullet holes in, and initially they're like, right, we need to strengthen those areas where the bullet holes are, and then I can't remember who it was. It was some woman during the war said, actually, what we need to do is strengthen the where there are no bullets, because the reality are the bullets are going through the wing, and it's not bringing the plane down. Those ones that are going down and crashing, it's hitting somewhere else. So actually, where all the bullet holes aren't the issue. It's somewhere else. So they took all the data and actually flipped it, and when
Yeah,
actually and that saved hundreds of lives apparently during the war
that's what the
because
black box theory does. It takes those opportunities which are perceived to be negative and actually turn them around, which is where you add value. So
absolutely.
I know that Russell's got to go, so
No, it's just funny. It just reminded me when I spoke to Stuart Ryan a month or so ago, and I asked the same question. So, what are you doing now? 10 minutes later, after Stuart had listed, oh, well, actually, you started and said, "Well, I'm semi-retired now," and then 10 minutes later, after listing everything, it was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, you really sound semi-retired. Yeah, you're really winding down, aren't you?" So,
It's like when I talk
um,
to Andy Reid, he's the same. Yeah, I'm semi-retired, and then you see he's on every government board or whatever in Leicester, and you're just like, actually you're not retired. You're just doing the things you like to do rather than
No,
things
and
you
I
have
was,
to
and
do.
I would also say as kind of one of our closing things. I don't think Stuart, I don't think you're allowed to be retired. I think you've got far too much to give to the industry and the future of the industry to retire anytime soon, I'm afraid.
And that's very kind of you to say that, Russell. And I think, maybe some of the things I've said today, you could argue are semi-controversial, but they're not intended to be so. They're more about, well, I'm happy to help if I need, I'm not going to go where I'm not needed, but I'll definitely help where people think you're needed. And I suppose if you look at the people out there, and I say this constructively, not arrogantly, there's not many people that have run three large businesses in the industry,
Absolutely.
grown them, and gone through that process where in most cases, most of the people that have worked for me, I could still talk to them. What I mean by that was, as you
Mm.
look at some of the
Yeah.
things that, people say to me, well, what's your management style? I have no doubt if my management style had been different, I probably would have been a wealthier person. But I don't subscribe to that. I work on the basis of there's no pockets and shrouds. So the day I go, they won't be piling in loads of cash into my coffin. What they'll be doing is hopefully the people that do turn up will be the people that respected me when I was here. So that to me is
Yeah.
important to me. So my reputation of supporting people that are now in better positions than they were when they arrived, to me is more comforting to me than necessarily earning lots and lots of money, which is just a different
Mm.
process. So,
Yeah.
and to me, that is genuinely, to me, what makes a difference, in the respect of supporting people. And some people don't think that way. They like to be, individuals, and that's great, by the way, and they're probably a lot wealthier than I'll ever be. But good luck to them. That doesn't do anything for me. I
Yeah.
think the comfort or the positiveness you get from life, and it's difficult at the moment, isn't it? The situation we're going through. Is based on what you've done for people. And, my view is always be good to people on the way up, because you never know when you're going to meet them on the way down.
Absolutely, and I think that's a really good place to end it, Stuart. I think it's a really valuable point. I think it's how I work like that. I
Mm.
don't always look for a value or a
Absolutely.
monetary value out of something, and I know Ross is the same. So, really good place to end it. Thank you ever so much for your time, Stuart. Like I say, we could have been on this for hours today because you're so interested, got so many viewpoints on stuff. So, if anyone does want to reach out to Stuart, all his details will be start end of the podcast, so you'll be able to find him. He's obviously on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out. But really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thanks for asking me to come on. I much appreciate it. I've really enjoyed it. So thanks, guys.
Absolute
Thanks,
pleasure.
Stuart.